Welcome everyone. Humanitarian aid is a material and logistic assistance to people who need help for the short term till the long term governmental efforts arrive. So we recently celebrated World Humanitarian Day on August 19th, focused on the theme It Takes a Village. So warm greetings from the land of Himalaya. I am pleased to welcome you all to the 12th session of choco-talk on DRR Humanitarian Aid in the Disaster. So I am Yogesh Bhattrai and I will be your moderator for today's session. So don't forget to grab a coffee and a chocolate bar to relieve your stress and creating a chocolate atmosphere around you and lay back and enjoy our webinar. So for today's session, we have two special guests, especially from different countries to share their immense knowledge regarding the disaster risk reduction, especially towards the humanitarian aid in the disaster. So before the beginning of the session, I would like to request few notes to the participants. As we all are joining the session virtually, please accept our apologies for any sort of technical glitches during the session. I would like to request you all to ensure that you are muted and your video is turned off in order to avoid any unintentional disturbances for the speakers. Similarly, I would like to request the participants to type their questions in the chat box and our speakers will answer them in the question and answer session only. Likewise, if you are interested in getting the certificates of the participation, please fill the Google Forms that will be shared in the chat box with all your details and we will send you the e-certificates on Sunday onwards. Okay, so moving towards our first speaker, it's time to invite our first speaker, Ms. Dear N.B. Sinangdang, for today's session. My apologies to ask Ms. Sinangdang if I have pronounced your name wrong. So she has been actively involved in the humanitarian affairs, especially coordination, disaster management, socio-social, psychosocial support, shelter, and faith engagement since 2006. Currently, she is working at Humanitarian Forum Indonesia as the communication and partnership manager while pursuing her master's degree in the disaster management. So without a delay, I would like to invite Ms. Sinangdang for her presentation. Ms. Sinangdang, the floor is all yours.
Thank you, Yogesh, for introduction. I would like to share with you the topic around coordination in humanitarian aid. I will just share my screen. Okay. Is it already showing?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so this topic is I think the topic that is not really favorable to everyone that is more likely to respond, but it is important for us to really think about the importance of coordination because at the end of the day, it definitely saves life. And I will just share with you how is our experience in doing the Central Sulawesi response, particularly for the coordination aspect, because it is complicated and it is fun as long as you really know how to deal with that. So for my background, I'm working for Humanitarian Forum Indonesia since 2010. So it is quite long for me to be in this humanitarian world. We are consisting of 18 humanitarian organizations based on the faith, three different faiths, Islamic organization, Christian, Catholic, and we also do have a forum, not faith-based, but they are founder, and a government unit agency. And we agree on the same thing that religion, it is not a burden. Religion gives us more strength to really do the humanitarian affairs and teaches us to care about each other. So that's why we decided to join in this one forum, Humanitarian Forum Indonesia. And speaking of coordination, it is an important aspect to do the humanitarian program cycle, and it must be equipped by a good information management as well. Without it, there's never be a successful humanitarian program that can reach out to the affected community. And knowing the concept, everybody is a coordinator. Everybody is a coordinator. Even if young people want to raise fund in their universities, in their neighborhood, and doing some response, they are a coordinator. And we really understand that to really work on these wheels, so somebody needs to start this coordination. So how to deal with that? And the objectives of us doing the coordination is to identify gaps, more importantly, and we reduces overlap in doing our response and improving our services and protection to the affected people. And while not many people really see the benefit of it, it is actually beneficial for us to really minimize the risk, to really share our expertise, our experience, and we have a very quite a well resource management and synergy and increase accountability as well. And we can also see coordination as a decision-making process or as a process itself, or if we tend to see the coordination as the organizational structure. And the component of good coordination is divided by four important components: commitment to the process and agreed to the clear purpose and strategy, agreement to the roles and responsibilities, and effective sharing information. The challenges in doing coordination while having in these industries, I can tell that disaster is getting more complex. You see that we all having a very big issue on the COVID-19 pandemic, while also Indonesia is prone to disasters. We are also still having flood, earthquake everywhere, and truly it's getting more complex. And you see that more organizations even now getting involved, even faith-based, government, private sector, media, and even the community institutions. And we see that really insufficient resources in numbers and also standards. And sometimes the decision made unilaterally. This is that we felt during the response that is a comment by the government or a strict government, particularly if the commander is the military. So that's why it's getting more challenging. And we need to do capacity building to build the coordination. And we need to build skills and understanding of humanitarian principles and standards, so we know that we are doing things right. And the risks in doing coordination, we still have conflicting agendas, or maybe funding does not meet for us to do coordination, or lack of flexibility, even staff turnover, making appointments is subject to change. And while doing coordination, the value of one person, one body can be seen as the value of all stakeholders, all the actors in that coordination system. In Indonesia, we have many institutions that have a mandate in coordination. We have the coordinating ministry, we have BNPBS or NDMO, FRC, national platform on DRR. In international, we know OCHA or even ICFA as a forum for NGOs. We also have Zakat Forum based on the Islamic organizations. and also many more that we can find in Indonesia. And they also know how to really build the coordination, not only getting involved in the field, but also how to build and how to really prepare the technicalities during coordination meeting, such as meeting the schedule information or preparing 5W form, for example, so everybody can know where their response at, and then also really following up the meeting results. And that is more important than just the coordination meeting. And then we also made the tools for coordination, such as contact directory. This is basically all of my job to really prepare all these tools, and also doing the needs assessment during the day 3 until day 14 after the disaster happened. So we assess the needs of the people and also spread it to the communication channels, information portal that we know, like humanitarian response.info or maybe covid19.go.id, HDX, and etc. So basically, to prepare all these tools for coordination is what I'm doing currently. And if we talk about coordination, we divide it into 3 levels: strategic coordination, to prioritize the use of all resources, ensuring that we stick to the principles and values; and then operational coordination to optimize the usage of the resource; and also the tactical coordination to define the steps of the action. And this is us in doing the humanitarian response. We are the humanitarian responder. So not only government or maybe military police, NGOs, either local or international, UN, donor, media, private institution, Red Cross or Red Crescent, but even so, the affected population is also the one that can be the humanitarian responders as well, and they can be included, should be included in the coordination mechanism. I will just skip this part. And in doing coordination, we know a lot of systems that is applied. We have not really ICS, incident command system, but we adopted it. We call it as disaster emergency management command system. And we also do have the cluster system, which more fluid and getting more various of stakeholders to be involved. And we also do have many kinds of forum for types of things, like forum for universities, forum for women, and even forum for private sector. And then also forum above the forum. We also do have that. And the clusters, I will just talk about the cluster. Cluster is a function for coordination, search capacity, technical assistance, and resource mobilization. In international level, we know there are 11 clusters, from health to food and security to early recovery. And they can only be activated if the affected country send the international assistance. In Indonesia, we never do that. So if you see that international assistance coming to Indonesia, it's not that we requested, but the government decided to welcome. So it is kind of like different. The government decided to welcome the international assistance, but it is required only through the local organization that can be their partners. And we also adopt the international clusters into 8 cluster system. Some are matching, some are not. but they are trying to fit in to the national system, because because that's the principle of the localization. The international should adjust to the system that is already applied in the affected area. And this only a sample of the cluster. We have the search and rescue, logistic, this is protection and displacement, facilities and utilities, health and early recovery, economy, and this is education. And all of that led by the line ministries that is relevant to the sectors that is ruled in the cluster. And we do have the national framework for disaster emergency management that is define the way in doing the disaster emergency management of command system. And at the command level, the tactical level, it is actually mandated in the district or city level. So the provincial level or even the national level only gives the assistance, technicalities, and also the policy or regulation assistance. Yeah, so this is the situation report in emergency response in the Central Sulawesi. You see that there are really high numbers of people being displaced, around 172,000 more people evacuated in the 122 locations. And also more of the 400 people died and also lost, and then the emergency shelter 322, and the coverage of the areas are very large. Palu City, Sigi District, Donggala, and Parigi. And the government at that time declared the emergency response status that's allow us to respond and doing the and also disbursing the fund in more flexible way, and it's also applied to the government's fund as well. And the international assistance also was welcome at that time because of this status. And the government also made the structure of the command system. You see that we do have here the incident commander is from the military, while the vice commander is from the BPBD, which is a civilian. And under their command, there are coordinators of logistic, planning, and in operation. For operation, it will be divided into the sectors like search and rescue, or maybe logistic and equipment, or maybe health and education. And also we have the data information and public relations, and for the security as well. And we do have the ASEAN in or through the AHA Center to liaise with the international organizations who want to come in, or maybe the donors who want to help Indonesia in doing the response. So AHA Center become the intermediary valuable organizations to liaise with that. And then this is the humanitarian country team response plan in the period of October until December 2018. We already made a data that we need to have 50 more than $50 million required for 191,000 people targeted in doing many kinds of sectors. So learning from not only the Central Sulawesi's response, but also many kinds of response, I do learn a lot of things in doing coordination, that we should keep the momentum. If we need to do the needs assessment, then do that quickly, do that rapidly, because the momentum is still there. That's for the example. And then also time management is really important. And then hand over the responsibility if you need to. And more importantly, if your mandate is not there. And then also saying thank you, being appreciative to the people that is involved and work together with you, and try to build closeness. And for Indonesia, this is the habit, or not the habit, the practice that we use, that we should take advantage of informal time. Sometimes important decisions can be made during lunch or during our hangout with the government during coffee time. And this is very important because at that time we build closeness, and then we can talk more freely with the government also, and also with the other actors. So do take advantage of informal time. Someone really has to start the confirmation, focus on strength and solve the problems before they grow, and do not make startling points. For example, like, okay, today we have a meeting. So without even considering that everybody already have their own agenda. So do not startle with that. Do I still have time? Okay. Yeah, I will just quickly. Yeah. Okay, that's the last of my presentation. Sorry for taking more time. Thank you, and I go back to Yogesh.
Thank you, Ms. Nanda, and your effort for building the trust and coordination among the humanitarian society is very impressive. So now I would like to move towards our next speaker. So our next speaker for today's session is Ms. Megnaguer. She is working as the portfolio manager with Save the Children in their humanitarian response to the conflict in Ukraine. Before this, she was coordinating operational aid in Afghanistan, Bangladesh, and Myanmar, among the other South and East Asian countries. For 5 years, she worked in India, mounting child-centric domestic emergency responses as well, and was involved in disaster risk management program as well. Likewise, she has also worked at the environment-based policy research organization, the Energy and Response Institute, where she worked on the climate change and the education for sustainable development. So, without further delay, I would like to invite Ms. Goel for her presentation. Ms. Goel, the floor is all yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Yogesh, and thank you, Dia. That was a really good presentation. I learned a lot about Indonesian coordination, and I was thinking that maybe my presentation, or my talk rather, I don't have a presentation, is going to be a little bit more about the international humanitarian aid. And so you will be able to see a little bit difference from what Dia explained about the coordination in the domestic system and how international or humanitarian aid is working in the international system. I am currently based in Kyiv, so I'm in Ukraine, and I thought it'll be good if I can take the example of Ukraine and explain the humanitarian ecosystem that is working here. And maybe that will give you an idea how things are happening in different parts of the world. And definitely things work differently in different countries and different regions. And so this is an example of an Eastern European response, which is not only based in Ukraine, but also is a multinational response because it's marked by a refugee crisis as well. So let me just give you some context through a map. Just hold on. you'll see my screen here. And I think some of you may be familiar with the conflict in Ukraine, but just to give you some orientation, this is the border between Russia and Ukraine over here. This is the eastern part of Ukraine, and bulk of the hostilities and the conflict is in this part that you can see outlined in like a pink color. And all the dots that you can see are recent attacks, missile attacks, or artillery attacks, or shelling, or killing. And the recent one was on 24th of August, which you can see here in Chaplain, where a train was destroyed and about 25 people were killed. This map gives you an idea how big the region of conflict is right now. And of course, with the missiles that people have access to now, the entire country is also at a risk of attack. This gives you a sense of all the population in this region is largely displaced and has moved westwards towards the rest of the country. So there are two types of populations that we are referring to right now. One is the internally displaced people who have moved from one part of the country to a safer, relatively safer other part of the country. And then let me just show you another map. There is another population, the people who have moved out of, people who have moved out of Ukraine to different parts of Europe, largely. So you can see that there's people who've moved within Ukraine, but there's also people who've moved outside, so into Belarus or into Poland, Czech Republic, Slovakia, etc. And then further on, they might have even moved to different parts of the country. Many of you would have heard that. So there are about 6.9 million people who are refugees outside of Ukraine, and then there are 6.6 million people who are displaced in Ukraine. There's about 18 million people who have been identified who need, and as of now, humanitarian organizations together have given about 12 million people aid. Now, what does this humanitarian aid actually look like? First of all, I think it's important to note that humanitarian aid is highly organized and sector of its own. There is, of course, it's a little bit different from charity, and charity would be done on a local basis, on a local scale. Many of those figures are not reflected in the numbers that I have told you now. This is the organized part of humanitarian aid. When a disaster happens or when a conflict like this happens, normally different countries, different governments, organizations, private entities, individual people come together and raise funds and donate money. When this money is collected, there are channels that need to be found to be sending that money into the country that requires it. So just to give an idea, I think there is, if I'm not wrong, I think it's $4.3 billion of worth of money that has been given to Ukraine as of now. That's a huge amount of money. So what happens is that, let's take an example. If the US government is providing aid to Ukraine, it provides aid through its own aid agency, which is USAID and also Bureau of Humanitarian Affairs. These two organizations will send money to different NGOs or the United Nations, or United Nations will have collected some money and they will do some of the work themselves, or they will send it to NGOs. So for instance, I'm working for an NGO called Save the Children. In Save the Children, we would receive the money from different donor entities. And then through us, we would be actually present on ground. Through us, we would do aid work. Now, what does this aid work include? This actually is centered around people. So it's not that humanitarian agencies decide who gets this aid, but this aid is actually identified through assessments. So which means that any kind of aid channeling happens to those, depending on what we get, information we get from the people in need. So assessments will include requirements around health needs, requirements around water sanitation, around nutrition, around food. Do they require cash? Do they require in-kind support? So for example, I showed you the map of Ukraine, and there is East Ukraine, which is heavily under fire, and there is the rest of Ukraine, which is at risk, but not currently at a high risk of shelling. So markets are active. In that case, when we provide aid, many of the people, say, living who have fled from eastern part and come into the government controlled part of Ukraine would require cash, because that's the easiest way. They get a choice, they can access the markets, they can buy what they want. And then there is something, the eastern part, which is now referred to as the non-government controlled areas with respect to Ukraine. It's difficult for them to use cash, because the currency that they were using may not be valid anymore. They may have to use Russian money. They are under occupation, so they may not have a full supply of items that they require to buy. In that case, people will opt for in-kind support. So we do an assessment, and then we get an idea on that. Then we also get ideas about what kind of livelihood support they require. In some cases, children, families may be separated from each other. They may be at risk of abuse. They may be at risk of getting trafficked. They may be just at risk of being separated from each other. There may be risk of violence between the communities. And you all know that in such situations, violence against women and children generally tends to go up. So we also identify needs of that kind to be able to provide support. So largely, you can say that humanitarian aid is divided into in-kind support, usually called as non-food items or food items or kits, which is the bulk of initial humanitarian support. And the second is cash. As you understand, there are different ways of providing cash. It could be cash in your hand, cash through wire transfers, bank transfers, etc., cash through coupons. And then the third is more service-based. So you would provide psychosocial aid, you would provide mental health support, you would provide counseling services, lawyer services, doctor services. You may provide services to set up business again, because many of these families have lost their entire businesses or houses. You may provide support to, access government schemes again, because many of them would be in a different part of the country, not familiar with how things work in another part of the country. So that's the service support. So these are the three main kinds of aid that humanitarian agencies provide. And naturally, even though, for example, like Save the Children is working here, there may be smaller organizations who are more tuned into the needs of the people, who are more connected, who speak the language of the people, who understand the geography well. So international aid agencies also partner with local organizations to deliver this aid. And this is, I won't go into this, but if you're interested in learning a little bit more about how this connection between donor agencies, international NGOs and national NGOs or local NGOs happens, you can read about localization. That's the term that is used for it. I think I just saw something in the chat box. Just hang on. There's a question. Okay, sorry, I saw that. Yeah, so another thing is that how is disaster aid distributed? So once we know what the people want, how do we actually do it? So this entire thing, from once we get the aid to once we actually give the aid, it's like a big management exercise. So it's management, which will include coordination. So I think Dia gave you some examples of that. So in this part, you will have the bulk of operation that's involved. So my job and many of us, many of the youth or many of the people who are interested in humanitarian aid largely form this part of the machinery. And this is what is known as emergency management. So once the emergency happens, how do you manage to reduce the effects of it? How do you mitigate it? How do you provide aid? All of this comes under management. And so they naturally use a lot of project management systems. So many of you who may not have had emergency experience, but have project management experience, are like a really good fit for this part of the work that is happening in humanitarian aid. Of course, you need a context of how it works, but the skills that you use or the tools that you use are generally project management skills, which involves finance, logistics, supply chain, designing of projects, rolling out of projects, project monitoring, budget monitoring, designing monitoring tools, designing evaluation tools, organizing research, studies, or then at the same time, you also have like media, communications around it, advocacy around it. All of this comes in emergency management. And through this management process, you basically divide the aid into different projects. So a project could be on providing education, or a combined project on education and health, or project on supporting just refugees, or project on just IDPs. It could be international cross-border project. It could be a very localized small project, in a very focused area. So it really depends on how you organize the aid, and that depends on organization to organization. So for example, I work with Save the Children. My mandate is to work with children. So the projects I design are around children. And then we organize this aid and we organize these projects. And through that, we set up objectives, we set up targets, and then we operationalize them, and then we finally distribute the aid that is required. And then all these numbers are fed back into the system. So we know exactly how many people we have reached, where we have reached them, with what kind of aid, and how much money has that taken us to do. Many of the people do generally ask me, how much money that people actually give goes to humanitarian aid? I think it's different for different organizations and different for different countries. Depends on the governments, depends on the integrity of organizations working. But I can say safely for Save the Children, the cost that reaches the people is about 85%. And 15% of the aid cost that reaches us is used for our own operation. So for running organization, paying salaries, renting offices, renting premises, flying people from one place to the other, transportation costs, etc. But 85% of the money usually reaches the people in need. And of course, we are all accountable for it. There are transparent reports that we publish after every dollar that we spend is actually reflected in public reports. Quickly, what are some of the challenges in this aid? Is that in international space largely is that each country has a specific context, and each conflict or each disaster is different. So getting people organized, or getting systems organized, or getting humanitarian system organized takes a long time. So many people who are working in the aid sector could feel really frustrated really quickly. Why isn't things happening? But the whole system is so big that it takes 3 to 4 minutes to 3 to 4 months to actually organize this aid. Another big challenge is that, like for example, in a country like this one, Ukraine conflict, access to affected populations can be very difficult because it could be unsafe for international humanitarian staff to access them, to reach to the affected people. Another challenge or barrier could be not having the materials that you need. So actually importing goods that are required by people from different parts of the world into Ukraine, and with the lack of active airports, or with, you would have heard that sea routes are blocked into Ukraine. So without having the right sea transport routes, it can be very challenging to bring materials back into the country of need. These are some of the few challenges. Of course, there are thousands of them, but despite which humanitarian aid workers are delivering to people who are in need. Like I said, 12 million people have already received aid in Ukraine. And that's by any standard a really, really big number. And I'm really glad that I'm part of such a big response and have got the opportunity to serve the people in Ukraine. So thank you so much. And I'll be happy to take any questions about my work. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Goel, for your wonderful presentation talk. And it's really nice to hear the work about your work in BRICS communities, as well as in Save the Children, for designing the projects around the children, for safekeeping them. Okay, so now we are open for the question and answer session. So if you have any questions, you can please write down in the chat box, and we will try to question towards our speaker for today. Okay, so I have a question here. Okay, the question is directed to us, dear. It's from Dr. Rema, and the question goes like this. As a young professional and women, how do you feel the challenges to deal with so many various local, national, international organizations, and how is the tips to maintain good coordination and conflict management?
Okay. These are tough questions, actually. Thank you, Dr. Rahma, for raising this up. Well, I can think about three things in challenges. The first one, uh, coordination. It is not just you talk to people, but it requires more efforts. Like you need to have good writing skills to take note on every kinds of decisions made, or you need to have a form that can map which kind of resources that we have. And sometimes you also take more than your working hours. So I think we are all agree that every hour for us, the humanitarian actors, is working hours. Especially disaster happen during the time that we are sleeping, or we're really not being alert of. So yeah, it requires more efforts basically. And you need to have a certain people to really only do the coordination duties. And that is not being realized by the humanitarian organizations. They tend to think, yeah, coordination, we can send the program officer, but then they they order the program officer to do a lot of things like distributing logistics, or managing the volunteers and whatsoever, which they cannot really allocate some time to do the coordination. And then the second one, people coming in the coordination meeting sometimes are not the decision makers that we are expected. If the topic is really strategic and we already dropped down the list of the participants, oh, it should be in the executive director, for example, but they are sending the volunteers. And we found that many, and sometimes there's been delay in decision making because they need to report to their bosses and then came to their decision, and it makes delay. So that's the second challenges. The third challenges, you see, Indonesia accommodates very good interaction of local organizations and national, and then also the international organizations. But there are different capacities in understanding how is the principle of humanitarian, all the standards that we all must aware of and must practice on. And sometimes these big capacities make misunderstanding of our roles. And as the intermediary party, I need to really balancing that out and really to see, oh, these local organizations have this strength. And sometimes in the coordination meeting, the local organizations tends to shy to speak their experience, their capacity, that they also have a different aspect that the national and international organizations do not have. And it is really our duty to bring them to really speak and going to the front, and more even. So even for the international organizations, sometimes they can be pushy as well. Sorry for saying this. They can be pushy as well, that sometimes they do not really see further the context of the local areas, and tend to generalize that all people need the capacity building. No, it is not like that. So the challenges for me is to really make effort in balancing that out, to really see their capacities. They have different roles, they have different mandates, and not to pass over their mandates in doing the work that's that I want to reach with. So that's the 3 challenges for me. And the tips in making good coordination, besides good writing skills, you need to really allocate some time in knowing who you want to work with, not only the organizational mandates, profile, their networks, learn who you are working with, but also the people. You need to also learn the structure. Sometimes in every organization, not the organization have the humanitarian specific response manager. Maybe they're spread into program development manager, this kind of youth program something, and you need to really learn that, and really to have to take your time in learning all the situations around your partner. And as what I mentioned earlier, take advantage of informal time, because it really helpful. Discussion over coffee, I learned, is always the best to really reach some of agreement. Even it is not formal yet, but at least you have a good sense of what is the purpose that we want to reach. Yeah, I hope it answers your questions, Dr. Rahma.
Okay. Similarly, Dr. Rema has same question for Miss Meghna too. So can you please answer the question?
Yeah,
Over to you,
I
Meghna.
because it's such a great question, and I hope you guys benefit from it, or at least feel that you face similar challenges. I think as a young professional, one of the key challenges I faced was that because disaster management and humanitarian aid is not a new thing, but it's newly organized. So there are not enough people to guide you as to what kind of professional avenues you can take, or where should you go and study, how can you get the right opportunities. And that's definitely one of the challenges I faced, that I didn't have enough mentors for it, like in maybe in other or other sectors. The second thing as a young professional is that, and I think that's possibly true more in Asia, and I cannot speak for any place else, but I can speak for India, is that the salaries are really low. So for many people, that's definitely not a good choice, because you're doing really hard work and you're doing highly technical work, but you're not that well paid. I think these were the two main things for me as a young professional to enter the humanitarian space. And as a young woman, I think one of the things I faced was that, like, for example, coming to Ukraine, it's not an easy choice because I haven't seen a single brown woman over here. So I know that there aren't many girls or, from Asia who are here. I think apart from me, I have just seen one other Asian in Ukraine in humanitarian assistance. And I live in a hotel where there is only humanitarian expats, and just not seeing any other Asian is testimony of the fact that we are probably the most populated continent, but there aren't any women coming here. And I think that's because we still have some patriarchal systems, and most of us have to take, or not, we're trained, or we're brought up in, like, for example, my own self, I should speak about my own self, that when I had the opportunity to move to Ukraine, I decided to consult my parents, I decided to consult my husband, and I consulted my brother. And then after this whole thing, we decided, okay, but whereas for many of the other women I met from other parts of the world, they were quite open to just coming. It was just their decision, and I had to think about it so much. The other thing was also, like, I wear traditional clothes back in India. I wear my salwar suit, but I just thought maybe I'll be like discriminated against, and so I'm wearing only Western clothing. Or likewise, if I was to go to Afghanistan, I would only wear. So I think those kind of challenges. Another challenge, which is my biggest challenge in humanitarian aid, is not being able to find sanitary places to use the washroom. I think it's like a big challenge, and people don't understand it. But not being able to use a toilet for like 16 hours a day is a huge challenge. You cannot go out in the open. And I think because of that, field visits can become incredibly difficult. And lastly, although I don't have kids of my own, I know many women who don't join the sector because they have children. and they are the primary caregivers for them. And so I think a combination of this between young and women, those are the main challenges I have faced. But I can say that if you start early and with the right guidance, I think you will be able to get into the international aid sector if that's something that you really want. There is possibilities of finding your way in it. So all the best.
I think Yogesh is not here. He's coming back.
Okay, sorry for the small technical glitches here. Uh, Here is another question I have just received from Andrew, and it's towards the Meghna. So he says the scope and complexity of the emergency management is wide, and in case of a specific project or emergency response, how many people are part of this process? So if you could explain about it, it would be really nice.
No, it's actually really different for different organizations. Like I said, we spend in Save the Children approximately 15% of the cost for running the organization. So it depends on different organizations. They may have lesser cost for people, they have more cost for people. So I know for local NGOs, like those who are working on ground, they use less operational cost and therefore they have lesser number of team staff, but we would say be in the mid-range. In Ukraine, we have about roughly 100 million USD portfolio, and we have about 130 staff which are doing this. Each project would normally have at least 10 odd people, so people from finance, people from logistics, supply chain, people who are actually doing the work on ground, partnership advisors, coordinators. And it's not that one person does a single project, the same person might be doing multiple projects, but on an average, if you see project-wise, maybe 10 to 12 people. And at a country level for something like this, we have 130. It is going to, we have 130, yeah, and we are still growing. We have about 50 vacancies. So that's how big it is. But like, for example, Afghanistan, we had 800 people working in the entire office. And India, I know we had 420 people working in Save the Children across the country. So it really differs, varies place to place, and it depends on your operational cost, how much you want to spend.
Okay, so I think it's last of the question that has been asked in the chat box. Okay.
Do we have a question in the chat box?
I think no, it's last.
Okay. Can I also add?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Yeah, I also agree with Meghna. It depends on your operational cost, but it also depends on how you design your project or your emergency response. If most of your project is working with the local partners, then you need to invest more budget and also human resources to your partners. But if you do it solo, if you do it on your own organizations, then I cannot really tell you, Andrew, the exact number of the staffs that you must recruit, but I think it is important that you need to hire community organizer and also someone dedicated for the information management or coordination. You can pick one of that too. So community organizer is the must because they really know the local context and they can really speak to the people and then really can facilitate or even manage the complaint and feedback mechanism that through that you can really develop more qualified project because you get their voice, you get their participation, and your project design really answers their needs. And yeah, I think the community organizer is playing the vital role for that. Yeah, I think that's my addition. Thank you, Yogesh.
Thank you, dear. And I think I have another question from Saran. So if you can unmute yourself for the question.
Yes. Thank you, Yogesh. Thank you, speakers. The address was wonderful. I actually have a question. I have two questions for Meghna, but I think we have time limitations, so I'll stick to one. So you shed light on the challenges that aid workers face. In places like the ones where you are currently located, that is Ukraine, do you also coordinate with the army for humanitarian assistance? And if you do, in what ways does that help?
Yeah, so that's a good question because in Ukraine, the current efforts are really towards military. As an international humanitarian organization that works with the principles of humanitarian, aid, we're actually neutral and impartial. So we personally, like as an organization, do not work with the military forces directly or through partners. We do not. So basically, we have a partnership assessment in which we identify if the money that we give to the partner in any way goes to any kind of military support or military activities. In that case, we do not partner with that organization. In Ukraine, there is a military tax as well. So a lot of partners. So for example, if they build in their operations cost, they may not explicitly state that some of their operational cost is going towards supporting military activities. So in that case, we probe more and we identify, are they paying any military tax? If they are, that means money is going to fund activities that use weapons, in which case we do not fund them. So it may be, so for example, Save the Children nowhere in the world uses any kind of military escorts, partners with any military organization, or makes partnership with any organization that provides military aid. But some organizations do. Some are working in non-governmental controlled areas. They are so providing medical aid, etc. They may require armed escorts. Some organizations do it, but we don't. So it's different for different.
Yogesh, may I ask the other questions?
Okay.
I mean, just
a
one.
quick one.
Very quick one. Thank you and sorry. And this one is as well for Meghna. Since you mentioned about the principles of humanitarian aid, like again, in the situations like the one in which you are helping people, how do you ensure objectivity while reaching out to people? I mean, while delivering aid, it is obviously practically not possible to refrain from interacting with people. And we can only guess, like very distantly, how difficult the situation must be for them. You witnessing all that right now in front of you, how do you manage to uphold the principles of neutrality, impartiality, and others that you are in the better know of?
So I think, so for example, one of the ways that we ensure objectivity is to have selection criteria. So what will happen if you go, say, to distribute winter kits to a community in northern Ukraine, which is currently, or like which is regularly shelled. So there are a lot of people whose houses have been damaged, who require aid, who have been displaced from other parts of the country. So they are like, so what happens is that we reach out to the government because they are the best people to give the source. So they give us the source of all the people whose houses, etc., have been damaged, or who are basically the vulnerable population. So that gives us a filtered version. And then the OCHA body that Dia mentioned, so OCHA also works, it's working in Ukraine. OCHA releases a list of selection criteria. Those are selection criteria that can be like people who are families who have people with chronic diseases, families who have people with who've been injured during the war, lost a limb, died, displaced, or with a lot of children, pregnant women, etc. And then that is the basis we use to filter the list we get from the government. And then each organization may have its own list. So for example, Save the Children is a child-centered organization. So the list includes child-centered filters. And that's how we finally arrive at the people who we give aid to. And that's possibly the systematic way. And then there, of course, there are non-systematic clues. So we go to different areas, assess the situation, talk to people, and we try. And that's why it's so important, like Dia mentioned, to have people in your organizations who are national staff or who are in touch with the community. They give you possibly the most accurate picture that you can get, and then you use the filter of neutrality, etc., to make sure that you're doing as impartial a job as you can, but I can say that 10 to 20% error is always there.
Thank you, Meghna, for your wonderful answer. So I guess that's the wrap for question and answer session. Thanks everyone for your questions, as well as I would like to thank our speaker for genuinely answering all our questions. Now, I'd like to request Saran for the key takeaways from today's session. Over to you, Saran. Thank you.
Thank you, Yogesh. We had two very engaging addresses coming from two professionals with very rich and diverse experience from the field. I'll take a few minutes to quickly sum up the session with key takeaways. From Dear Sanandang's address, we learn that because coordination is so crucial, it is in fact something that people of any age can do. After all, it's about maintaining the continuous connectivity across ages and fields. We understood from her address that humanitarian coordination works to improve the effectiveness of humanitarian response. And in order to do that, there are some risks which should be taken care of and negotiate access, mobilize funds and other resources to ensure a clear and consistent public communication system, messaging system, and at the same time, monitor the progress of the work being carried out. Dear also spoke about the 11 clusters which function with specific focus in their humanitarian aid work. The idea of introducing these clusters was ensuring that there is predictable leadership and accountability in all main sectors or areas of humanitarian response to strengthen system-wide preparedness and technical capacity to respond to emergencies. The clusters were designated with specific sectors to focus on. Dear, from your address, we could get an idea of the deep and collective thought process that actually goes into planning humanitarian aid work, and further conveying it to the dedicated teams, individuals, and organizations as a connected, it's a connected journey that follows and is continuously improving on what was done earlier, making changes as per the rising and dynamic needs. And even after all that, there is still so much of execution that depends on the wise call of the people on ground, thus putting them also in a responsible and tricky situation, as I understand. Now that point takes me to Meghna's intriguing sharing. Firstly, I absolutely love the way you connected the theme with the case of Ukraine and explained to us so patiently. It is important for us to know the difference between charity and aid with which you started your sharing. Further, Meghna told us about the different kinds of aid, including cash and cash extended in different ways, and aid in kind and aid in terms of support provided to rebuild what was lost during the crisis. It was not until you shared that, at least I knew, that aid money is actually divided for aid people, for people who are providing aid, as well as people in need of aid. Because that the aid money is also required to carry out the work to be done. And then you also shared snippets from your experience with Save the Children and in Ukraine specifically. So my heartfelt thanks to both the speakers for taking time out of their busy schedule and being with us here today. I now hand over the floor back to our wonderful moderator, Yogesh.
Okay, thank you, Sharon, for summarizing all the description perfectly. Now, I would like to invite Dr. Rema Hanifa, the Secretary General of You Inspire Alliance, for the thanks note and also announce next You Inspire webinar. Dr. Rema, over to you. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Yogesh, and for your great moderation today. And also thank you very much, Mbak Dear Sinandang and also Meghna Goyal for your sharing from Indonesia and from India, and how you have, it's all been summarized by Saran. Thank you very much, Saran, for the key takeaways and also for coordinating this DRR talk. I really learned both about coordination and also about the challenges and how Like one is talking about humanitarian and emergency issue that day, but Meghna is also talking about humanitarian from human-made disaster in Ukraine and Afghanistan. So I think both bring challenges, and I think both of you are really brave to go to the battlefield to provide the humanitarian aid as a young woman and young professionals. I really, really appreciate our sharing today. And of course, I also really thank you, everyone that attend today. We have from 6 countries, even though small members, but we are from 6 countries and we have a good discussion today. Thank you very much. And also specifically for Andrew Gitat from Asia Water Council, Young Professionals. We look forward to our next collaboration with AWC YP, a series of webinar. It will be a special series for DRR Talk, but also together with AWC Young Professionals on water-related disaster. Yeah, please await our series together. Yeah, we look forward our series together, and we will be having DRR Talk every end of the month, every Saturday or end of the month. We hope that we can still continue this discussion and knowledge sharing in between countries. We can see the rich learning, but also we can see many mutual challenges, mutual situation, mutual condition, and also we can learn how to do better from each stories and lesson learned. So for myself, I really thank you, and on behalf of You Inspire Alliance, this alliance has enabled the knowledge sharing from different countries. So we really thank you again for your participation, and we hope that you can still participate, and maybe we can seek for further collaboration together. So thank you very much again for today, DRR Talk to everyone.
Thank you.
Also apology for any inconvenience during the event. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for your especially considered time, and thank you all. I'd like to end the session now.